In a quaint little town, nestled between rolling hills and sprawling fields, life moved at a pace that felt like a gentle breeze. The houses, each painted in soft pastel colors, lined the streets like old friends gathered for a reunion. It was the kind of place where everyone knew each other by name, where children played freely in backyards and neighbors exchanged warm greetings over white picket fences. But beneath this picturesque surface lay an undercurrent of tension, a battle for control waged by the Homeowners Association, or HOA, a group of self-appointed guardians determined to maintain their vision of community perfection. As the chief of police in the seemingly idyllic town, I wore two hats, one as a law enforcement officer devoted to serving and protecting, and the other as an ordinary resident navigating the often absurd regulations imposed by the HOA. Their rules were excessive, dictating everything from lawn height to mailbox colors. While some residents complied willingly, others grumbled quietly behind closed doors. I had always thought of myself as a good neighbor, someone who respected property boundaries and kept my yard tidy. However, my cherished possession, a bright red tractor, had become a point of contention. To many, it was just a machine used for farming tasks. To me, it represented a connection to my roots and independence. I used it to tend to my small plot of land where tomatoes and corn thrived under my care. It had become a part of my identity, a symbol of hard work and dedication. Yet, the HOA viewed it differently. They saw it as an eyesore, something that disrupted their carefully manicured vision of aesthetic harmony. The first complaint arrived discreetly in the mail, a notice citing excessive equipment clutter, along with an ominous reminder of potential fines. I chuckled at first, surely they couldn't be serious. But as weeks passed, the letters piled up like autumn leaves, each more threatening than the last. I found myself at odds with these self-appointed rulers of our neighborhood, feeling increasingly frustrated by their insistence on conformity. Little did they know that beneath my friendly facade lay a badge and an unwavering commitment to justice. My role as chief of police meant that I understood the law better than most in our community. It also meant that I was well aware of their overreach and hypocrisy. The stage was set for an unexpected clash, one that would unfold in ways none of us could have anticipated and ultimately lead to the destruction of something I held dear. The Homeowners Association in our town prided itself on maintaining a pristine environment, and its rules reflected this unwavering commitment to conformity. Each resident was handed a thick booklet of regulations upon moving in, an exhaustive list that dictated not only the appearance of homes but also how we conducted our daily lives. From the moment I became a part of this community, I realized that the HOA's grip on our lives was both pervasive and unyielding. First and foremost, the association demanded strict adherence to aesthetic standards. Every house had to conform to an approved color palette, muted tones were favored while vibrant colors were strictly prohibited. Lawns had to remain perfectly manicured with grass trimmed to an exact height, no more than 3 inches. Even flowers were regulated. Each homeowner could only plant specific types deemed appropriate for the neighborhood. In the eyes of the HOA, individuality was viewed as a threat to their carefully crafted utopia. The rules extended far beyond mere appearances. The HOA took it upon themselves to control noise levels, requiring residents to limit outdoor gatherings after sunset and banning any music that could be heard from neighboring properties. Even parking was subject to scrutiny. Cars could only be parked in designated areas, and any vehicle deemed unsightly or in poor condition faced swift penalties. It seemed that even the simplest acts of living, like inviting friends over for a barbecue or parking a truck on the street, were fraught with potential conflict. As I navigated these restrictions, I often found myself chuckling at the absurdity of it all. Who would have thought that my choice of tractor would become such a contentious issue? To me, it was just a tool for working my land, but the HOA saw it as an unwelcome deviation from their vision of perfection. They argued that it detracted from the neighborhood's charm, claiming it created an impression of neglect and disarray. In meetings filled with tense discussions, I watched as board members wielded their power like a sledgehammer, enforcing rules with an iron fist while ignoring the spirit of community that once defined our town. Their passion for order often overshadowed compassion, leaving many residents feeling stifled by an oppressive atmosphere where even minor infractions could lead to hefty fines or demands for immediate rectification. It was in this environment of meticulous control that I began to see cracks forming in what I had once thought was a harmonious community. The very essence of neighborliness seemed lost beneath layers of bureaucracy and regulations. As tensions simmered, I couldn't help but wonder how far the HOA would go to impose their will and what lengths I might have to take in response when they crossed a line I never thought they would dare to breach. To many in our community, a tractor might seem like just another piece of machinery, a tool for farm tasks. But for me, my bright red tractor was so much more. It was a tangible connection to my roots, a reflection of my values, and a symbol of hard work and independence. Growing up on a small farm had instilled in me a deep appreciation for the land and the effort it took to cultivate it. The tractor represented that heritage, serving as both a practical asset for my gardening endeavors and a cherished reminder of my family's legacy. Every Saturday morning, I would climb into the driver's seat, the sun warming my back as I prepared to tend to my modest plot of land. The engine roared to life, resonating with power and potential. I used the tractor to plow fields, plant seeds, and harvest vegetables. It wasn't just about getting work done, it was a meditative experience that allowed me to connect with nature and find solace amid life's chaos. The satisfaction of seeing healthy crops rise from the earth filled me with pride and joy. Moreover, the tractor had become a centerpiece of my life in the community. It wasn't uncommon for neighbors to stop by and chat while I worked, sharing tips on gardening or swapping stories from our pasts. It served as a backdrop for laughter and good conversation, fostering connections that made our neighborhood feel like home. In those moments, I could see how much we all valued the simple pleasures in life, like fresh produce and friendly banter. Yet, as tensions with the HOA escalated over what they deemed excessive equipment clutter, I began to feel the weight of their scrutiny bearing down on me. To them, my tractor was an eyesore. It disrupted their vision of pristine landscapes and manicured lawns. They saw conformity as essential to maintaining property values, while I saw it as an infringement on personal expression and freedom. With each complaint I received, I felt a pang of anxiety mixed with anger. How could they not understand what this machine meant to me? It was more than just metal and wheels. It held memories of family gatherings, laughter echoing across fields, and the satisfaction of nurturing something from seed to harvest. They were not just attacking an object, they were attacking a part of who I was. As their demands grew more aggressive, I realized that this battle was about more than just my tractor. It was about standing up for my rights and asserting that there was value in individuality amidst conformity. Little did they know that their attempts to extinguish that spirit would only ignite a fire within me, one that would soon lead to shocking consequences neither side could have anticipated. As days turned into weeks, the conflict between me and the HOA escalated beyond mere complaints. Each letter I received felt like a personal attack, a reminder that my cherished tractor was now a thorn in their side. The board seemed to relish their power, issuing fines for violations that ranged from the trivial to the absurd. It was as if they were on a mission to enforce their vision of perfection at all costs, and I was standing in their way. One evening, after receiving yet another notice insisting that my tractor be removed or permanently stored out of sight, I decided to attend the next HOA meeting. I wanted to confront the board directly and advocate for my rights as both a homeowner and a proud member of the community. With my heart racing, I prepared my remarks ready to explain why my tractor was not just an eyesore but an integral part of who I was. The meeting room buzzed with energy as residents gathered, some eager to voice their grievances while others simply wanted to avoid confrontation. I watched as the HOA board members took their positions at the front, exuding an air of authority that made me uneasy. They began discussing various neighborhood issues, but it wasn't long before they turned their attention to me and my excessive equipment. The room fell silent as they presented my case, framing it as a problem that needed urgent resolution. When my turn came to speak, I stood up, trying to project confidence despite feeling vulnerable. I detailed my connection to the tractor, sharing stories of how it had been passed down through generations and its role in fostering community ties. But as I spoke, I could see dismissive glances exchanged among board members. Their expressions hinted at a lack of empathy. They saw only rules being broken and not the heart behind those actions. In that moment, something inside me shifted. I realized that this was not simply about a tractor, it was about standing up against what felt like tyranny wrapped in neat regulations. After the meeting, tensions simmered as whispers of retaliation began circulating among residents who shared my frustrations but felt powerless against the HOA's grip. Things took a turn for the worse when one particularly vocal member of the HOA began rallying support against me, painting me as a troublemaker who defied community values. The narrative twisted further when anonymous flyers appeared around town calling for a community vote to revoke my privileges as chief of police due to my supposed recklessness in maintaining property standards. As pressure mounted from both sides, I could feel the storm brewing, a conflict that would soon culminate in unforeseen consequences. Little did I know that this battle over a tractor would spark an incident that would change everything, leading to shocking revelations about loyalty, authority, and what it truly means to protect one's community. The night of the incident began like any other, but there was a palpable tension in the air that hinted at something brewing beneath the surface. I had just returned home from another exhausting HOA meeting, my mind buzzing with frustration and disbelief at the lengths some members would go to enforce their rules. My tractor sat proudly in my yard, illuminated by the soft glow of a nearby porch light, a silent witness to the conflict that had consumed me. As I settled down for the evening, I found it hard to shake off the feeling that something was amiss. I locked the doors and drew the curtains, but sleep eluded me. Instead, I paced around my living room, replaying conversations from that evening's meeting in my mind. How could they justify their actions? Did they really think they could force me to get rid of something so meaningful? The anger inside me simmered, but I also felt an underlying sense of dread. Around midnight, I finally decided to step outside for some fresh air. As I walked toward the front porch, I noticed something strange, a flickering light dancing in the distance. My heart sank as I realized it was coming from my yard. Rushing down the steps, I felt a surge of adrenaline as I sprinted toward the source of the glow. When I reached my tractor, what I saw sent shockwaves through me. Flames were engulfing my beloved tractor, crackling and popping as they devoured the metal and rubber. A desperate panic took hold as I grabbed my phone and called 911, knowing full well that as chief of police, this was no ordinary fire. This was arson, an intentional act of destruction aimed at me and everything I stood for. As I waited for emergency responders to arrive, my mind raced with possibilities. Who would do such a thing? Was it someone from the HOA seeking to silence me? Or perhaps an angry neighbor caught up in this escalating feud? The flames roared louder, illuminating the faces of shocked neighbors who had emerged from their homes to witness the chaos. It was a surreal scene, a community divided by conflict now standing together in horror at what had unfolded. When the fire department finally arrived, they worked quickly to extinguish the blaze, but it was too late. My tractor lay charred and lifeless on the ground, a smoldering reminder of everything that had been lost. As firefighters began their investigation into what had caused the fire, I felt a mix of anger and heartbreak wash over me. This was not just about a piece of machinery, it was an attack on my identity and values. In that moment, I knew things could never go back to how they once were. The line between neighborly disputes and criminality had been crossed. As the smoke cleared and reality set in, I made a silent vow this wouldn't go unanswered. The very people who sought to tear down my spirit would soon discover that beneath my conflicts with them lay an unwavering commitment to justice, one that neither they nor their petty regulations could extinguish. In the aftermath of the fire, the reality of what had happened began to sink in. My beloved tractor was nothing more than a pile of charred remnants, and alongside it lay a heavy sense of violation. As chief of police, I was tasked with investigating the very crime that had targeted my personal life. The irony was not lost on me. I was determined to uncover the truth behind this brazen act of destruction. The morning after the fire, I gathered my team for a briefing, maintaining a composed exterior while my mind raced with possibilities. We cordoned off my yard, treating it as a crime scene, and began the investigation with meticulous attention to detail. As we sifted through the ashes, I couldn't help but feel an overwhelming mix of emotions, anger, sadness, and a fierce determination to find whoever had done this. I started by interviewing neighbors who had witnessed the incident. Some claimed they had seen shadows darting through the darkness shortly before the flames erupted. Others recounted hearing muffled voices, a hurried conversation that faded into the night. Each account added pieces to a puzzle that was still largely incomplete. As I took notes and listened intently, I could sense the fear among my neighbors. They were afraid of retribution from whoever was responsible. With each passing hour, it became increasingly clear that this wasn't just an act of vandalism, it felt personal. The HOA board members had been vocal about their disdain for my tractor and my unwillingness to comply with their regulations. Could one of them have resorted to such extreme measures? The thought sent chills down my spine, but I couldn't let emotion cloud my judgment. Next, I reached out to our local fire department to analyze what remained of the tractor. They confirmed suspicions of arson accelerants had been used to ignite the flames quickly. This revelation only intensified my resolve to identify the culprit. I reviewed security footage from nearby homes, hoping to catch a glimpse of something or someone that could lead us in the right direction. As I immersed myself in this investigation, I also grappled with how it would affect my role as chief of police. Could I remain unbiased in pursuing justice for myself? Would it compromise my authority if it became known that I was personally involved? These questions weighed heavily on me as I tried to balance my professional responsibilities with my personal quest for retribution. I began reaching out to other homeowners who had experienced conflicts with the HOA over similar issues, those who felt oppressed and silenced by its rigid rules. What if there was a larger pattern at play? It seemed plausible that others might have grievances against the board that were simmering just beneath the surface. As leads began to materialize and my investigation deepened, one thing became clear: this conflict reached far beyond a single incident involving a tractor. It was about community dynamics, power struggles, and ultimately about standing up against those who sought to impose their will unjustly. With every piece of evidence collected and every neighbor interviewed, I felt an unwavering sense of purpose growing within me. A commitment not just to seek justice for my tractor, but to reclaim our community from those who would see it stifled under their tyrannical rule. As the investigation progressed, I found myself piecing together a web of clues that hinted at a deeper conspiracy within the HOA. The more I delved into the lives of my neighbors, the more I uncovered a tapestry of resentment and discontent simmering just beneath the surface. It was clear that my tractor was not the only point of contention. Many residents had faced similar hostility for daring to step outside the rigid boundaries set by the board. One afternoon, as I reviewed the security footage from various homes surrounding my property, a particular clip caught my attention. It showed a shadowy figure lingering near my yard just before the fire erupted. The figure appeared to be wearing dark clothing, and though their face was obscured, their movements were suspicious. This was no random act. It felt calculated, as if they had been waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Armed with this new lead, I decided to revisit some of my earlier interviews with neighbors. I spoke with Mrs. Henderson, an elderly woman who lived 2 doors down and had always been friendly, often sharing her garden produce with me. When I mentioned the figure on the footage, her eyes widened in recognition. "I thought I saw someone lurking around that night," she said. "There's been talk about you among some of the HOA members. They're furious about your tractor." Her words sent chills down my spine, confirming my suspicions that this wasn't just an isolated incident but rather a manifestation of collective anger. The HOA board had rallied discontented residents against me, painting me as a troublemaker in their quest for conformity. Next, I turned my attention to one of the more vocal board members, Greg Thompson. He had been particularly adamant during meetings about enforcing regulations and often led discussions about my supposed violations. It seemed too coincidental that he would emerge as such a fervent critic just as tensions were rising over my tractor. I started to dig deeper into his background and connections within the community. In conversations with other residents, I learned that Greg had a history of conflict with neighbors who dared to challenge his authority. There were whispers about intimidation tactics he employed to keep dissent at bay. Could he have orchestrated this attack? The thought lingered in my mind like an unwelcome guest. As I gathered more testimonies and started to connect dots between Greg and other HOA members, it became increasingly clear that they were acting as a cohesive unit against anyone who dared to defy their rules. Their shared disdain for me made them prime suspects in what felt like a coordinated effort to silence dissent. In addition to Greg's involvement, I also noted a pattern among complaints lodged against other residents who had similar disputes with the HOA. It seemed they were using threats and fines to coerce compliance from anyone who strayed too far from their vision of an ideal neighborhood. The connection between these complaints and my tractor burning began to feel not only plausible but likely. With each clue unearthed and every suspicion confirmed, I felt an urgency building within me, not just for justice for my tractor, but for all those who had suffered under the oppressive thumb of this board. As I prepared to confront these individuals, I knew that this investigation would not merely be about retribution, it would be about reclaiming our community from fear and control. The time had come for a confrontation that had been brewing for weeks. Armed with evidence and a determination fueled by both personal loss and a sense of justice, I knew I had to face the HOA board head-on. The upcoming meeting was my opportunity to expose the truth behind the destruction of my tractor and challenge the oppressive tactics they employed against our community. As I walked into the familiar meeting room, the air was thick with tension. Residents filled the seats, their faces a mix of curiosity and apprehension. Many of them had witnessed the chaos surrounding my tractor, but few had dared to speak out against the HOA's iron-fisted rule. I could feel their eyes on me, and I took a deep breath, readying myself for the battle ahead. The board members sat at their long table, exuding an air of authority that was both intimidating and infuriating. Greg Thompson, the most vocal member, smirked as I approached the podium. "Ah, our local troublemaker graces us with his presence," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. My heart raced, but I refused to let him rattle me. "Thank you all for gathering tonight," I began, projecting a calmness I didn't entirely feel. I'm here to address an issue that has affected not only me personally but also our entire community, the destruction of my tractor. I laid out the timeline of events, recounting how my property had been targeted after countless complaints from the HOA. As I spoke, I could see nods of understanding from some residents in the audience. They too had felt the weight of the HOA's regulations but had feared speaking out. Then came the moment I had prepared for, the evidence. I presented footage of that fateful night showing the shadowy figure lurking near my property just before the fire ignited. This person is still unidentified, I continued, but given recent developments and testimonies from fellow residents, it seems likely that this act was coordinated by individuals within this very board. Gasps rippled through the audience as my words hung in the air. Greg's expression shifted from smugness to disbelief. "That's preposterous," he exclaimed, rising from his seat defensively. "You're making wild accusations without any proof." "I have testimonies," I countered firmly. "Neighbors like Mrs. Henderson have seen suspicious activities and conversations aimed at targeting me due to my tractor." The murmurs in the room grew louder as other residents began to voice their support for my claims. With each passing moment, it became clear that my confrontation was resonating with those present. The power that the HOA had wielded so effortlessly seemed to be crumbling under scrutiny. As more residents began to speak up about their own experiences with intimidation and harassment, it became apparent that this meeting would not just be about my tractor, it was about reclaiming our community from fear. "Enough is enough," I declared, feeling emboldened by the growing support around me. "We deserve to live without fear of retribution for simply trying to maintain our homes as we see fit. This community should be about collaboration and respect, not control and intimidation." As the board members exchanged nervous glances, it felt like a turning point, a moment where others were finally willing to stand alongside me against an unjust system. It was no longer just my fight, it was a collective stand against tyranny disguised as governance. The confrontation marked a significant shift in our neighborhood dynamics, one that echoed hope amidst frustration and set the stage for what would come next in this unfolding saga. The confrontation with the HOA board had ignited a spark within the community, but it was just the beginning of a deeper investigation into the truth behind my tractor's destruction. With newfound support from my neighbors, I felt invigorated and determined to uncover the individuals responsible for what had happened. I knew I had to dig deeper, not just for my sake but for everyone who had suffered under the oppressive rule of the HOA. In the days that followed the meeting, I began combing through records and documents related to the HOA. What started as a search for information about my case quickly spiraled into uncovering a pattern of behavior that painted a damning picture of the board's practices. It became evident that they had been manipulating rules and regulations to suit their agenda, targeting anyone who dared to question their authority. I reached out to former residents who had moved away due to conflicts with the board. Their stories were strikingly similar: accusations of property violations, harassment through fines, and ultimately the pressure to conform or leave. Each account added another layer to the growing narrative of an organization bent on controlling its members, often resorting to intimidation tactics. Then came a breakthrough. One former resident revealed that she had kept records of complaints filed against her by the HOA. As we sifted through her documents, we discovered a pattern of complaints that seemed arbitrary and excessive, many related to aesthetics rather than actual violations. It appeared they were using these complaints as leverage to instill fear in residents who didn't fall in line. Armed with this information, I decided it was time to confront Greg Thompson directly. I arranged a meeting under the pretense of wanting to discuss potential compromises regarding property maintenance issues. When I arrived at his home, I found him surprisingly cordial, almost too accommodating. We exchanged pleasantries before I steered the conversation toward the HOA's recent actions. As we talked, I subtly introduced details from my investigation, watching his reactions carefully. Greg maintained an air of confidence, but there was an unmistakable tension in his posture when I mentioned stories from former residents. It was as if I had struck a nerve. My instincts told me he was hiding something far more sinister than mere disputes over property lines. Finally, I took a leap and confronted him about the arson incident directly, framing it as speculation rather than accusation. "You know how passionate some people can get about property standards," I said casually, gauging his response. His demeanor shifted almost imperceptibly, a flicker of fear flashed in his eyes before he regained his composure. "People are just too sensitive these days," he replied dismissively, but the way he avoided eye contact spoke volumes. The more we spoke, the clearer it became that he feared exposure that might unravel everything he had built within this community through manipulation and control. With each interaction, I felt like I was peeling back layers of deceit surrounding the HOA. Determined to bring this tangled web of lies into the light, I began compiling evidence not only for my own case but also for those who had faced similar injustices from Greg and his cohorts. The truth was within reach, all it needed was someone brave enough to reveal it, and I was prepared to be that person. As whispers of dissent grew louder among residents emboldened by our collective stand against tyranny, I realized our fight extended beyond my tractor. It was about reclaiming our community's spirit and ensuring that no one else would endure what I had faced in silence. The truth would soon be uncovered and justice would be served one way or another. The momentum of our collective stand against the HOA had set the stage for a reckoning that was long overdue. With mounting evidence, I organized a follow-up meeting with not only the HOA board but also the residents who had rallied behind me. This time, the atmosphere was charged with anticipation. People were ready to reclaim their community. As we gathered in the familiar meeting room, I could feel the tension in the air. The board members, including Greg Thompson, sat at their table, visibly on edge. They were used to commanding authority over silent, compliant residents, but that dynamic had shifted dramatically. The room buzzed with the energy of those who had felt oppressed for too long, and I could see determination etched on their faces. I opened the meeting by addressing the residents directly. "We've been silenced for too long," I began, my voice steady but passionate. "What happened to my tractor isn't just an isolated incident, it's part of a pattern of intimidation and control that has affected many of us." I laid out our findings, testimonies from former residents, records of excessive complaints, and evidence of Greg's manipulative tactics. As I spoke, I watched Greg's expression shift from defiance to concern. The truth was unraveling before him, and he could no longer hide behind his facade of authority. When I presented evidence linking him to the arson disguised as a concerned neighbor during my investigation, gasps filled the room. The tide was turning. At that moment, several residents stood up to share their own experiences with the HOA's oppressive rules and intimidation tactics. Their voices mixed together in a chorus of frustration and resolve, creating a powerful narrative that resonated throughout the room. It became clear that we were not just fighting for one tractor, we were fighting for dignity and respect within our own community. As the meeting unfolded, it became apparent that Greg's hold on the HOA was crumbling under scrutiny. One by one, fellow board members began to express their discomfort with his methods. They were tired of living in fear and wanted to restore harmony rather than perpetuate division. It was a pivotal moment, a turning point where fear morphed into empowerment. In response to this growing dissent, Greg tried to regain control by dismissing our concerns as mere grievances from disgruntled residents. But his words fell flat against the wave of unity sweeping through the room. Eventually, it became clear that he could no longer maintain his position intact. He would have to face consequences for his actions. The fallout from that meeting was swift. The board underwent an overhaul as residents voted to remove Greg and replace him with more community-focused individuals who believed in collaboration rather than intimidation. As new board members emerged, they committed to transparency and open dialogue, a welcome shift from the oppressive rule we had endured. In addition to these changes at the HOA level, I made it clear that criminal charges would be pursued against those responsible for my tractor's destruction. The investigation led to formal charges being filed against Greg and others involved in orchestrating the arson. As I stood there watching the new board take shape and feeling a sense of justice being served, I realized how far we had come as a community. What began as a battle over a tractor had transformed into a movement for change, one that would ensure no resident would ever feel silenced or intimidated again. In reclaiming our community spirit, we had learned an invaluable lesson. Change is possible when voices unite against injustice, and sometimes it takes a spark, both literal and metaphorical, to ignite that change. As I sat on my porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I found myself reflecting on the whirlwind of events that had unfolded over the past few months. It was hard to believe that the destruction of my tractor had sparked such a profound transformation, not just in my life but within our entire community. What began as a personal battle against an oppressive HOA had evolved into a collective fight for justice and dignity. I thought about the feelings of isolation I had experienced when my tractor was burned. For so long, I felt like I was the only one standing up against the HOA's demands. But now, as I looked around at my neighbors, I realized how wrong I had been. Many had endured their own struggles under the heavy hand of regulation and intimidation. Their silence was not a lack of belief, but rather a fear of retribution that kept them from speaking out. It was humbling to know that my own confrontation with the board had given them the courage to find their voices. The experience taught me about resilience and the power of community. When we stand together, we can challenge even the most entrenched systems of control. The unity we forged in those meetings, where residents shared their grievances and supported each other, was nothing short of inspiring. It reminded me that we all have a stake in our community, and it is our responsibility to protect it from those who would seek to undermine it for personal gain. I also reflected on my role as chief of police throughout this ordeal. The irony was not lost on me. Here I was, tasked with enforcing laws and maintaining order while battling a group that had effectively operated outside of ethical boundaries. It forced me to confront my own biases and assumptions about authority. My badge no longer felt like just a symbol of power. It became a reminder of my duty to serve every resident fairly, regardless of their status or position in the community. This experience also opened my eyes to the importance of transparency and accountability in leadership. The removal of Greg Thompson from the board highlighted how crucial it is for communities to have leaders who genuinely represent their interests and foster an environment where dialogue is encouraged rather than stifled. Moving forward, I felt a renewed sense of purpose, not just as a law enforcement officer but as an active participant in shaping our community's future. As I sipped my coffee and listened to laughter echoing from nearby yards, I realized that we were no longer living in fear. Instead, we were embarking on a new chapter, a chapter defined by cooperation, understanding, and respect for one another's rights. The journey had been fraught with challenges, but it had ultimately brought us closer together. In reflecting on these lessons, I understood that sometimes adversity reveals our true strengths and ignites change in ways we never anticipated. My tractor may have been reduced to ashes, but from those ashes rose a powerful spirit of community, a spirit that would guide us as we moved forward together, ensuring that no one would ever feel silenced again. The battle may have started over property lines and regulations, but it ended with greater awareness, solidarity, and hope for what lay ahead. As I reflect on the tumultuous journey that began with my tractor and led to a community-wide awakening, I'm struck by the profound lessons we've learned along the way. What started as a personal grievance, a simple battle over a beloved piece of machinery, transformed into a movement that challenged the very foundation of our neighborhood's governance. It's remarkable how a single incident can ripple through lives, igniting courage and inspiring unity among those who had long felt silenced. The experience underscored the importance of standing up for what is right, even in the face of adversity. Many residents had witnessed injustices but felt powerless to combat them alone. Our collective resolve showed that when individuals come together with a shared purpose, they can dismantle oppressive systems and reclaim their voices. This newfound solidarity became our strength, allowing us to confront not just the HOA but also the fear that had kept us in check for so long. I've come to appreciate the role of leadership not just in terms of authority but in fostering an environment where everyone feels valued and heard. The change in our HOA's leadership marked a new beginning for our community, one where transparency and accountability would guide decision-making. It serves as a reminder that leaders are not above their constituents. They are there to serve them, listen to their needs, and advocate for their rights. Through this ordeal, I also learned about the importance of resilience. The path to justice was not straightforward. It was filled with obstacles, frustrations, and moments of doubt. Yet, each challenge only reinforced my commitment to fighting for my beliefs and the well-being of my neighbors. Together, we created a space where open dialogue could flourish, allowing us to address grievances rather than allowing them to fester in silence. As we move forward, I hope our story serves as an example for other communities facing similar struggles. Change is possible when individuals take a stand against injustice, when they refuse to be cowed by intimidation tactics or oppressive rules. Our journey proved that it's crucial to challenge authority when it oversteps its bounds and that we must be vigilant guardians of our rights. In closing, I want to emphasize that while my tractor may have been destroyed, what emerged from that loss was something far more valuable, a community united in purpose and spirit. We learned to embrace our differences while recognizing the common thread that binds us all, the desire for respect, dignity, and the freedom to live authentically. As I gaze at my yard now, which buzzes with laughter from friendly gatherings and shared meals, I feel hopeful about what lies ahead. We are no longer passive residents but active participants in shaping our destiny. Together, we've created a vibrant community where every voice matters, a place where we can cultivate not only crops but also connections grounded in trust and mutual respect. The fire may have burned my tractor down, but it ignited a flame of resilience and unity within us all, one that will continue to burn brightly as we forge ahead into the future.